All right, so we'll get started, and I'm so glad everybody came. This was such an important topic, and some people couldn't make the last one, so we decided to do Big Idea after work. Well, for some people, it's after work in the East anyway, so that people could get the benefit of the work that the team did on this wonderful reports. We have two of the team, three with us, Janice, Sharon, and Paul, who are three of the team members who worked on this really fantastic report. So we released the report in three parts, but now it's all together. So after this, I'll put another link to it again, but you can just go to the HR Strategy Council page on LinkedIn. All of our reports are there. And I'll put the recording of this up on LinkedIn probably tomorrow, but you can always go to my YouTube channel, and all of our previous big ideas are all there as well. So I'm just going to turn this over to Paul and Sharon, and they can take us through this.
I guess, thank you, Deborah. That gives a good introduction. And I'm just going to give a little bit of a preface before Sharon jumps in. But really what we're trying to do is there's a tremendous amount of information and resources out there in the scope of mental health and wellness or psychological safety. And what we really wanted to do is to go to the sources and try to bring it together in it's sort of a one-stop shop where you could find it. And so that was sort of our consolidation exercise. So by no means is this work exhaustive. Is it complete? When you'll see in each of the document sections that Deborah referenced, they all say sort of it's a work in progress. It's a point in time. That we took what we thought were the most. We broke it down into three sections, or as what we kind of labeled as the three P's to psychological safety. And the first one was around promotion, and just trying to really build some awareness around that, reduce the stigma around psychological safety or mental health, and really get the promotion on the table and get the topic surfaced. The second one was around prevention, which is thinking about all the things that you as individuals or an organization can do to really create such a sound, trusting, safe workplace that prevention is the answer. So the best offense is a good defense. So, or the best defense is a good offense, I guess. You can tell I don't play hockey. And then the last P was around protection. And really, what can you do from that point to really protect the integrity and the safety and the wellness of those around you and those yourself? And we sort of tagged this little tagline of take back your wellness, if you will. So giving kind of the responsibility to us as individuals to really own and take back that state of wellness. So that was the context. We leveraged a lot of material from the Center for Mental Health in the Workplace, which was done by Great-West Life, or now known as Canada Life. So that's a great resource, and a lot of our stuff is just bringing some more visibility to their tools and information, and it's extremely sound. I'm certified by Canadian Mental Health Association, MHA, as a psychological workplace advisor. So I can help organizations go into their workplace and really make sure they have a framework for strong psychological health and safety or mental health. So I brought some of that background from my certification from CMHA as well. So I'll turn it over to Sharon, and she's going to lead us through the first P and give us some of the highlights. And we'll have lots of room for dialogue and discussion.
Thank you, Paul. I'm pleased to talk about first the promotion piece and then the prevention piece. So the promotion piece was actually worked on by Osama and Francina, and sadly they're not able to be with us today. As Paul mentioned, the theme throughout our work is take back your wellness. Osama and Frosina did an amazing job in looking at the standard and sharing highlights and insights and resources on ways we can promote psychological safety in our workplace. The question to ask is, how can I help to take charge and what will I do? By no means is this document exhaustive, as we have only briefly stepped into the waters of promoting psychological health and safety in our teams, projects, and organizations. Our psychological and physical health are interconnected. As outlined in the promotion piece, the positive outcomes are significant. In building organizations that are psychologically safe, this may not be easy. When organizations are inclusive, where it's safe to learn, safe to contribute, and challenge the status quo, this does help to reduce absenteeism. People are present. They are able to innovate, be creative, perform, and thrive. When psychological health and safety is present, this creates space to come forward and share when mistakes are made from a place to learn. People can then show up with their full self. When psychological health and safety is fostered at all levels in the organization, this in turn does become the competitive advantage. This helps to propel your ability to attract, grow, and retain great talent who are invested and engaged. We've all heard the surveys and the studies on the levels of engagement. The organizations that promote psychological health and safety continue to work together from a place of inclusion do build learning and innovative organizations. Our questions are, how can you take charge? What will you do to find greater ways to promote psychological safety in your organization? And how can you take back your wellness? I will now move to the prevention piece.
Sharon, I'm sorry, can I just interrupt you for a sec? I think your mic switches off every now and then because you talk and then we miss a whole bunch of words. It's like the mic isn't working.
No, okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure what your setup is, but.
Sure. Okay, let's just try. Thank you for letting me know.
Like for now, we can't hear you.
Is that better?
For now, but it seems to be okay. And then you go blank. So let's see.
Sort of choppy.
Okay. Huh. Okay, let me know if it goes choppy again, and we'll try something different.
Okay.
So before just closing on the promotion piece, we encourage you to ask questions. How can you take charge? What will you do to find greater ways to promote psychological safety in your organization? And the ongoing question, how can you take back your wellness? As we move into the prevention piece, I had the pleasure of working with Sartaj, and sadly, she's unable to be with us today. Sartaj and I looked at the 13 factors of psychological health and safety, sharing ideas and examples to build psychological safety into our teams, projects, and organizations. As mentioned earlier, creating conversations where psychological safety is present may not always be easy. A culture of fear may make it difficult for many to speak up, ask questions, or bring new ideas forward. In some organizations, the hierarchy where it's discouraged to ask questions unless you're the leader in the room is slowing down the opportunities to learn, grow, and thrive. At times, some of these organizations are then taken offline, not done in an inclusive manner, even when some of these sidebar conversations are in agreement. These organizations, teams, and projects that are fear-based and risk-averse are impeding learning and growth and are impacting the bottom line. Throughout our prevention piece, we highlighted examples across the sectors where individuals spoke up and challenged the status quo, discovering new ways forward. Can you hear me? Paul, is it okay? Okay, great. Thank you. Some of the examples shared were from very diverse teams coming forward with different backgrounds and cultures where collectively we found new ways forward from a place of inclusion. One of our biggest areas we can create greater psychological safety is in our meetings. It is important we look at the true cost of our meetings and what is the return on investment. Some meetings do not have the right people in the room, are poorly planned and unable to make decisions. We are losing time to focus on our true priority and even more time recovering from these poorly planned meetings. When organizations are psychologically safe, we can find new ways, creating greater diversity of thought, where asking questions to learn and grow is part of the culture. Some may think this will take more time. In these new times of COVID, giving our employees the right tools to thrive in their roles has never been more important. I would share making space and creating time for these conversations around psychological safety has never been more important. Where we are working towards outcomes, creating space for innovation and creativity, where our teams, projects, and organizations can grow and thrive. This does become our competitive advantage. Take some time to reflect on our work. Share this openly and broadly, not only with your colleagues, with your friends, and also your family. As each of us navigate these new waters, commit to doing one thing. Take one step. Change begins one conversation at a time. We ask you these questions again. Is it expensive to be yourself? Can you bring your full self to work? And find ways to take back your wellness.
Great, thank you, Sharon. Just before I jump into the third P, which is really around protection, I wanted to just share some additional context for why we thought promotion was still so critical today, and why we thought prevention is, the best defense of having a healthy workplace is really around building prevention. So you don't necessarily have to get to the intervention spot, or you have less risk getting to the intervention, or it's minimized or mitigated in some way. So spending time on the first two Ps is really, the priority of an individual's wellness and psychological safety, and really smart for an organization to spend time on those first two Ps. And there are a couple of reasons that has come up in some of the work that I've done through CMHA. And one is, and I'm going to use my little barometer here. One is, in past generations, in past workplaces, in past times, the threshold of what was expected for an individual or people to put up with at the workplace was up here. The threshold was here. It's long hours, it's a lot of work, workload is heavy, resources are slim, so just put up with it, stick it out, and that's just the way it is. And if you can't handle that, you just need to get out of the way because you're not tough enough. So some of those sentiments were what kind of has brought organizations to where we are today. It's this, this is how tough it was when I was in the workforce. And some of it may be generational. Some of it may be just historical. Some industries have, different thresholds in those spaces. But what's happening today is that threshold is lowering, and it's lowering greatly. So what used to be the limit that you were supposed to endure and put up with no complaints and no questions, has now dropped down to here. Because people are now saying, no way, I stop at this level. This is where I call time, because I have worked too hard to keep myself healthy, psychologically, physically healthy, whether it's people's regimes around physical wellness, nutrition, social connectivity, spiritual connectivity. People today have worked really hard to build that whole protected self-healthy well-being. And they're not going to give it up for anyone or any organization. So they're calling foul much lower down the barometer than what used to be up here. And so that's why promotion and prevention is so critical, because there's still pockets in organizations where the barometer's here and leaders are saying, what's wrong with them down here? They need to be tougher. They need to be more resilient. This is just the way it is. So we have to help leaders see where this reset is. And thankfully, it is being reset at a much healthier level because people are trying to preserve what they've worked so hard to create in their own wellness and psychological safety. The other piece that I'm just going to add before I move on is there's a difference in the spectrum. So you can go from, a rough workplace where psychological safety, mental health is challenged. There's harassment, discrimination, a lot of toxicity in the workplace because of really overt, egregious behaviors. But the other spectrum is more on the subtleties of what people are calling out now. And these are sort of the behaviors that have always been excused to this point in time. Paul's just a straight shooter. So he comes across a little rough, a little direct, a little abrupt. He's a little, rough around the edges, but boy, does he get things done. Well, that can be very off-putting, and that can cause a lot of stress to people. That can cause a lot of anxiety to people. And so these nuances of leader behaviors, where historically we've just excused, looked the other way, decided that we would just accept it, kind of bullying on the tough, the rough, the critical, where people are really, kind of debilitating kind of the actions of others through their derogatory comments and those kinds of things. So those little pieces are now coming out to the other end of the spectrum and sort of saying, these are important to us. I don't want someone yelling at me at the workplace. I don't want someone using profanities every day in the workplace. I don't want the temper tantrums of stuff being slammed down on someone's desk, just because they're an emotional, passionate person. So that's the other part of where this space is starting to play a lot more in, is psychological safety is really starting around those smaller but equally impactful behaviors and actions by leaders. So I wanted to bring that out because the spectrum is getting bigger and it's getting more on those sensitive pieces that have been excused for some time. And the other aspect that causes a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress is this constant spin and churn organizations are going through. It's what are the priorities today, the objectives, the goals, and having people focus on all of that at 11 o'clock in the morning, and then at 2 o'clock, it shifts to something else. So leaders not pushing back and really getting true clarity and kind of acting as that buffer between upper levels and front line, that is a big piece because there's too many yes pleasers out there of just chasing whatever goals are thrown at them. And that's causing a lot of spin and a lot of churn. And it's a really big piece for people to really burn out and get stressed over, and really does create a kind of a toxic workplace. So I just wanted to touch on some of those nuances in the space. And then the last piece around the P is this promotion piece, around protection piece. So how can we add on from promotion, prevention to protection? And like what Sharon and Farzina worked on in the prevention piece, that third section also is based on those 13 psychological factors from CMHA. And it's a really simple, great way to think about it because it puts those 13 factors on a buffet. So it gives you 13 things to look at that most organizations already have. Some are already in place to different degrees, but it allows an organization to go in and kind of cherry pick to say, if we want to create the most psychologically safe, mentally sound, and secure workplace, then what are some of these factors that we might want to look at? And so the prevention or the protection piece, like prevention, also focuses on those 13 factors. So let me give you an example of one of those 13 factors. So one might be just around the example that I used before around spin and churn, is our expectations and goals and objectives, are those things clear? Are they set out? Are they completely explicit so people know how they're being measured, what's, what the timelines are and what the milestones are? And that's one of the 13 factors that sort of says, maybe that's what's causing so much distraction, so much burnout in our organization. We need to really do less, focus on the priorities, and get our people focused on what matters most. And that's a huge challenge for most organizations, because the answer to what do we need to do, the answer is always yes to everything. And so that's one of the factors, which is around expectations. Another one might just be, is around leadership. What does your leadership capability and capacity look like? And if you have really poor leadership, how can you expect to have a really psychologically safe and mentally well-being workplace where colleagues can be engaged and be their own person? Or as Sharon said, how much does it cost to, really be yourself? So leadership's a big piece. So that could be another factor where organizations could go in and say, it is about skill building. Do they know what contemporary leadership looks like? Do they know what empathy looks like, particularly now in times of COVID? How good are they at really leading across distance with everyone working remotely? And when they have all their checkpoints and their times to connect with their colleagues, are they talking about leadership or are they checking in on managing? What's done, what's on fire, what's blowing up, what do we need to do, what are the timelines? And so are leaders really doing these management check-ins, or are they spending time doing leadership? So that's another one of the factors that is a huge help in creating a psychologically healthy and safe work environment. And I'll give you a simple example, and Sharon talked about it as well, which was, are leaders really leading? And for most cases, that's hard, because what I believe is leaders are leading with what I call leftover leadership. Leftover leadership is the amount of time you have left over at the end of the day to really be a leader, not a manager, not a moderator, not a strategist, but a leader. It's the leftover time of the day. It's the leftover energy you have at the end of the day. It's the leftover tools and resources and money that you're going to spend to make yourself better to be a leader. So leftover leadership has to go. It has to be really prioritized. It has to be meaningful. It has to be intentional. It has to be transparent, and it has to be contemporary. So those are two of the factors that Sharon talked about in the prevention piece. And those are the same factors that we use in the protection piece, or protection/intervention. So in the intervention piece, there's some great resources in there that tell you around places to go to get more help. And the protection or intervention piece is really structured around three things. One is, as a leader, as a colleague, you have the job of three aspects. One is to identify where there may be a need or a concern around psychological health and safety or a wellness issue. So it's to identify, then to respond, and then the third one is redirect. So are you doing your job and your due diligence to really identify where there might be a concern? How might you respond? And there's some great questions, some great tips in there on how to respond. 20 questions that leaders can ask without being intrusive, without being offensive, without being off-putting, because that's the balance of this work. I need to do something, but I don't want to be offensive and intrusive to someone who might feel this is private. So it's to identify, to respond, and then redirect. And that's usually the most liberating for leaders, because redirect means you don't have to be the expert. All you need to do as a leader is to identify something might be smoldering. You think about how you would respond, and then help them with resources to redirect it to some professional status, whether that's, a clinician, a doctor, a physician, EAP, employee assistance programs, if workplaces have them. But there is so many resources in this last section, as there are in each of the other two sections for promotion and for prevention, that it gives you tips and resources all in one spot. So that's sort of the promotion piece and around intervention, is linking to identify, respond, and redirect to be able to bring something to the forefront. And Sharon mentioned this at the beginning, which was, because this is sensitive space, because it is still fairly new in some organizations, the silver lining of COVID is it's bringing this more to attention in places where it would have never got attention. So organizations are really thinking about it. They're thinking about the well-being of their people, because they're not connected in one physical place, and that can be challenging. So they are thinking about it more. And so to be able to bring this to the forefront is, good for the psychological health and safety and mental wellness space. The other part that came out in some of our research was this tagline that we keep using, which is psychological safety, or psychological health and safety. It's getting a little bit more pickup, I think. And so what the Canadian Mental Health Association found in their research was they preferred to use psychological health and safety instead of saying, let's talk about mental health. Because when 9 out of 10 people heard the expression mental health, they really heard mental illness. And so that doesn't really help as much with promotion and prevention. So they really are quite adamant about using the psychological health and safety to get away from the mental illness piece, and really thinking about mental health, promoting, preserving, preventing, and nurturing a healthy psychological well-being. The other reason why they thought this was important, and coming from a manufacturing background, it made perfect sense to me, which was, when you think about physical health and safety that most of our workplaces have, even in office buildings and in office work, there's still a health and safety committee. It's about physical health and safety. In plants, it's really important, physical health and safety. So if you think about how much due diligence goes into physical health and safety, so no one gets injured, no one gets hurt, there's no time off, everyone is productive, everyone can contribute, and everyone is watching everyone's back to make sure that none of their colleagues get hurt or injured. That's a physical health and safety mindset. And psychological health and safety mindset is what they're piggybacking on to do the same thing. We all look out for one another. We all want to make sure that everyone has got the best environment that's safe and healthy for everyone, like we would in a physical setting. So I'll stop there, and we can kind of open it up if you have questions. Sharon, if you have anything to add. Janice is on the team, if you have anything to add. That was kind of our work and the framework around our work, with some of the context of what we thought was important.
Yeah, so that's so great. And Ingrid put in, if you missed it, there's a link in the chat to the white paper. And, maybe just to keep order, if you want to ask a question, maybe just put it in the chat as we get going, the questions come. And Ingrid wants to start with a question or a comment.
Yeah, I think it's more a thought piece, Paul, Sharon, Janice. So So I guess the piece that we're struggling with, the psychological safety reflects in the workplace, but because of COVID, many individuals' workplace is now segueing into their home and back and forth. The challenge that I see with leaders is how do you deal with a situation of psychological safety that would normally be in the employee's privy in the work in home, but now it's affecting the workplace because everything is blended together. So the example, when we had the law firm on the council meeting, there was this discussion about if an employee decided that they did not want to come back to work, even if they were working remotely because they had family obligations, whether it was for kids or a parent, etc. So before COVID, you know, there'd be issues with helping taking care of your elderly parents, etc. That normally would be managed on a personal basis. You would direct people to EAP. But what we were saying is now it's flowing into the workplace. It's not protected under the COVID Leave Acts, but the employee's saying, I can't really work. And the response from the lawyer was, you really have to let it go, you know, because you want to make sure that you're seen as a good employer and you have to deal with it. But I'm very pragmatic. So I find it challenging to make such a broad statement. So I'm opening it up. What do people
But
think?
what I'd like, but I'm not seeing, what's the link to psychological health and safety, Ingrid?
Because the employee is saying that they can't work because they have concerns about their mental health, taking care of a parent or a child and being able to do the work. And the employer's pushing back and saying, we don't care, you just have to do the work. So
so I think what I'd like to do is make sure we separate the conversation here between, you know, the obligation for childcare versus mental health issues, right? So, because I don't want us to go down the road of discussing what are your employer obligations.
No, I don't mean the.
So can you reframe it in the mental health space?
So how does a leader deal with that situation where an employee is feeling that they're not being heard or valued because they're trying to take care of a parent or a child and not being able to do the work as much? So to Paul's point about the employer just being a leftover manager and saying, you know, you just have to do it that way. So how do you deal with that type of situation? Paul kept nodding. I think he knew what I was trying to get to.
I think, well, let me give it a shot. What I think what was coming through in my mind, it's a little sort of truncated maybe, but it's just, you know, there's an employee that's just sort of saying, I'm at capacity. I have all these other responsibilities and accountabilities in my life, and work is part of it. And, you know, I can't ignore my elder care. I can't ignore my child care, but maybe what I'm asking is, can I ignore my work for right now because I'm at capacity? And so, you know, that's, you know, I think that is probably something that, you know, we will see more of. And it's not that it's unfamiliar to us, because we all remember, you know, the early 2000s and the sandwich generation of everyone having to take care of young children, and then elder care. And now that elder care is even more compromised, depending on where these elders are living, that puts a whole other piece. And that just came up on the radio the other day, which is people now that were in line to go into long-term care facilities, their children are saying no. You know, we've been waiting for 4 years to get on the list, and now they're saying no. And that means they go right back to the bottom of the list again. And so I can't imagine the stress and the anxiety that would cause a family to kind of go through and figure out how they're going to deal with that care. So that compression, I think, is only going to get worse because of COVID, because of all the homeschooling. And so that sandwich generation phenomena is going to get, 10 times more pronounced because of the COVID overlay. And people also sort of saying, well, maybe I need to look to get more flexibility out of my workplace, because my flexibility on elder care and childcare, I've only got 3 options. And so can I do my work part-time? Can I shift my hours of work? And so I think, to a leader's perspective, that's where the floodgates have to open. And that's why I keep saying you need to be a contemporary leader to think about what these contemporary issues are, and how can you start to think about, other ways that people might be able to get that work done that looks different from the scenario, Ingrid, you've raised. But I do think it's going to get more pronounced.
I'd love to hear from some of the leaders what you're experiencing or hearing right now, and from your employees. What are you struggling with? Anybody have any examples? I'll give you an example from a client. So I'm dealing with the situation right now of a long-standing toxic employee that has created a lot of issues over the years that I've done interventions with, right? And it's getting to a point now where one of the people working with her is either going to go off on leave or sue the organization under Bill C-168, or go, take them, forward. So I spoke to her very senior leader. The interim manager came to me and I said, you're probably going to have to do a harassment investigation. And, that's going to set off a whole domino effect, because it's going to be a shock to the organization. And this leader is incredibly uncomfortable with the idea of formalizing. He said, well, I'll talk to her. I said, no, we're past talk. I've coached. I've done the interventions. You don't need to bring me back. You really now need to escalate this to a serious level, because it's a workplace risk. And so what I've been finding is that leaders are very hesitant to really deal with an employee who is harassing somebody else. And so I'm not sure how you manage, with leaders like that who...
I have an idea.
I'm sure it's a bad boy idea.
No, but there is always a little unconvention in my thinking. So, you know what? So I say then, that leader, and this is, this is my tough leadership development tactics, I guess. But that leader is just as inexcusable as that employee. And so,
absolutely.
Yes. And so I wouldn't even deal with that leader. I'd be going to that leader's boss and sort of saying, here is your problem. You have a leader that is not leading and isn't stepping up to the plate to really deal with this toxic employee. And we have done all the appropriate, well-intended practices to try to make sure that we can give this employee every opportunity. But the bottom line, and I keep saying, is like my leftover leadership. If you're a leader, you get paid more money for a reason. And so you need to lead, and you need to have that. And so I would be talking to that leader's boss to engage them to sort of say, you're not doing your job either to really let this leader, this direct report of yours, coast. So the 3 of you, so that, there's my bad boy leadership answer. That's
the reality is it's an old problem. It goes to the top of the house. So, there are organizations that are like families, right? So if we don't talk about it and we pretend it's not there, it'll blow over until the next time, but oh well, we all know what she's like and she's really good. And so there
And
are
that was really-
organizations that are like that, right?
And that's what I was referring to as this, what we've been using as excusable behavior
Exactly.
has to stop. Like, so I'm explosive, so I'm a hothead. And I'm a passionate, emotional person, and I wear everything on my sleeve. Well, that's had its day. People are not, if I'm not going to take that in my own circles, in my own family, I'm certainly not going to take it from an employer contract where I give something, expect to get something back.
Sharon?
I think, adding to what Paul is saying, when these toxic behaviors continue, and I'm sure many of us have been part of organizations where that happens, is it actually, how your employees are treating each other is how they're going to treat your clients. And how they treat your clients has a direct impact on your ability to win work. And by not calling out the toxic behavior and saying, hey, this isn't okay, when new staff come on board, they see this going on and going, oh, okay, I'm a little bit aggressive. I guess that's the culture here. It needs to be called out sooner than later, so that, and I've used the saying when my son was little, in preschool, we tell kids in preschool, if someone's doing something to you, say, stop it, I don't like it. And in organizations, we need to speak up faster and louder to say, hey, this isn't okay. We need to shut the behavior down, because it ultimately it impacts your ability to win work, and it impacts your competitive advantage.
Maybe this is also a good time to mention, because Deborah, with your question, what would you do as a leader, and Sharon's comments is the other thing that we thought about, excuse me, the other thing that we thought about was, how do we help leaders embark on this conversation? How do we help leaders broach the topic or approach the topic? And so we created some, maybe 20 or so, what we called entry points. What are the entry points to have this conversation? As an individual, how do I raise this? Because it could be, challenging. I don't want to go down this space. I'm not qualified. I'm uncomfortable. Whatever the reason is, I don't want to be intrusive. This is private. This is not politically correct. So there's lots of excuses as to why leaders, or legitimate concerns, why leaders are hesitant. And so we created these entry points, and they're just conversation starters of how an individual could go and take a step, and also how an organization could think about it as a step. And so, organizations where I have worked in the past, some would welcome that. I could walk into the boardroom and say, let's talk about psychological health and safety from an employee engagement and employee experience perspective, and they would be all over it. Other organizations would have no interest. But if I went in with an entry point saying, if we have to increase our market share, how are we going to do that? How are we going to get employees to rally around what they need to do to get more market share, to get more top line sales? How are we going to get more growth in developing markets? Well, who's going to do that? It's our employees. And if we need them to speak up where there are problems, where there are better ways, where they can help with innovation, where they can help with customer pieces, the only way they're going to do that if they feel safe and trusted and nurtured so that they can do that. So there I can now enter psychological health and safety from a business perspective. So those entry points might be helpful to get those conversations kind of rolling.
And of course, you guys know that there's the whole culture piece, which is part of what I was alluding to with my client, that if you have a culture of, we don't want to deal with this, we don't want to confront it. I was doing some women's leadership groups in May for a client where the culture is very high performance, hard driving. And one of the most senior women had like 3 kids at home, one who was special needs, who was finding it impossible to carry on. She was responsible for billions of dollars worth of deals and didn't feel that she could ever say to her leaders that she was struggling. You know, her husband had a high power job, on the phone 8 to 6, trying to educate the kids at home. But it's a culture where it would be viewed as a weakness, right? To say, I can't juggle this all. And this was an incredibly accomplished woman who told me how stressed she is because she can't keep it all together and doesn't dare say anything. So I wonder if you can speak about the culture piece, Paul, Sharon, or Janice.
You know me, I like to talk. I can always have a comment. I mean, the culture piece, you know, there is that, you know, what we would call that old school culture. And, you know, is there an organization out there that isn't high performing and wants high results and great market share and profitability and long-term growth? Of course not. So I always find it silly that organizations have to say all that in the first place. So what are you, an underperforming, low market share, holding on by life support organization? Of course you're not. But those organizations that have that old culture, that 1950s culture, they're hanging on by a thread because there is no new workforce. There is no talent out there that's coming in that's going to put up with that. They're already calling foul. That's why they're moving around so much. You know, their holistic life is just as important to them as their work. And they are validated by many other things than just their work validation. And that's why social media is so important to those generations. But it's also the other generations that never wanted to speak up, like maybe that person you're referring to. They're getting the tails, holding on to the tails of those other folks and increasing the voice to sort of say, well, yeah, I would like something that's a little more manageable. I want to be able to call what's, you know, when things are unreasonable and where more resources. So the voices are rising, and that's where some of this is coming out. And I think those cultures, you know, those days are numbered. I came from an investment management. You can't get more cutthroat and old school than investment management. And, you know, that was a big job trying to turn that culture around. But it's there on life support, because the talent coming in isn't going to tolerate it. And Deborah, you made another good point about children. And I know not everyone has children, but the amount of psychological health and safety issues that are rising in children with anxiety, children with panic attacks, children suffering from all kinds of stress and anxiety that are just young children. And so parents that are now seeing that in their children and having to manage through that and kind of acknowledge that and respond and intervene, it's the only place where people pay attention to psychological health and safety. They really pay attention when it's being in a child community, right? But when we get into a work community, we pay less attention to it. So, you know, people that are in the workplace that have those intersections, that voice will help drive those culture changes too. Because that's a big population and it's growing, where children and teens have a lot of those psychological safety issues, and those teens are on sprint position to enter the workplace. Yeah. And their threshold is going to be here, not here.
Paul, may I make a comment?
Absolutely, Bonnie.
Thank you, Deborah. I was invited by Sharon Summerfield, and I'm grateful for that. I train high-level executive and personal assistants all over the world. And in the United States, there are 10 million assistants, 95 to 98% of whom are women. And what I'm seeing since the pandemic has begun is that, you know, what you're saying is absolutely right, that stress and anxiety is off the charts. What started out to be an emergency situation is now settling into something different, which is, it needs to be sustained. And so one of the things I wanted to say before this is over is I want to be a resource for all of you in terms of access to the executive assistants in your orbit, in the companies that you represent. These mostly women are, what I'm seeing is that the most successful companies with the cultures of respect have leaders like Guardian Life Insurance in New York City, Deanna Mulligan from the very beginning held daily briefings for the staff. Transparency and accountability has been critical. What I'm seeing is that even people who have been working together for a really long time, this pandemic has made these partnerships feel very new. There's and that's adding to the anxiety. On top of that, the diversity and inclusion issues. And on top of that, the idea that now everybody is communicating via webcam, where communication was a problem before. So essentially what I want to get to is that I see a workplace that is in such chaos and tumult. I put in the chat, I think what I see, I just want to say it out loud, I see that there's going to be a need for a new person in HR to deal with this mental health crisis that is, I don't think we've even begun to see the tip of the iceberg there, because I hear it from the assistants of the world who are spinning out with the isolation and with the not knowing. To make it transparent and accountable would solve a lot of problems, because there's so much fear about losing their jobs, about getting furloughed. Can they get reskilled? Can they get training? That kind of thing. I also believe there's going to be a big attention that needs to be paid to training, retraining people. And you said, Paul, about the lack of education for leaders. It's so right. I think another big change that's going to have to happen is that they're going to have to change curriculum in business school to teach leaders exactly about psychological safety, because it's that important. So I just see a lot of changes on the horizon, and I'm just happy to hear that you're tackling this in the HR community, because of course you are key to all of this happening in organizations. Thanks.
And that's so great what
Thank
you're
you.
saying, Bonnie. And one of the examples we had in our group, which some people here know about, is one of our members had a situation where a woman was working from home and was being abused, got in touch with HR because she was suicidal, which then set up a whole chain of events and made everybody in the HR community realize that we're dealing with issues that we would never, so to your point, what HR person got into this ever expecting to have to call 911 for an employee at home?
Everybody's on new territory here. That's what needs to be acknowledged. And like who knew how to deal with this? Nobody's dealt with this issue before. Not HR, not the assistants, certainly not the leaders, but the leaders have to give a damn about this. And somehow we need to make it clear that, what will happen, of course, is, you'll have a parade out the door. I speak with the assistants who are very busy looking for an exit strategy if they are being abused and demeaned and disrespected, et cetera, in these ways.
Well, Hay Consulting, you guys probably all saw this, came up with a research report about 2 weeks ago where they surveyed like staff, all levels, and 50% of them are just waiting for COVID to end and the market to open up, because they feel so badly treated and so badly supported through this that they're hanging on because there are no other jobs. But once things change, they won't forget. They won't forget.
Hi there. It's Aisha. Hi, Deborah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
What a great conversation to be a part of. Thank you so much for inviting me. I wasn't camera ready today, but I do promise to be on video next time. I wanted to add a couple of pieces here. So the first one is, I think the reality on the ground in certain businesses is surely different than others. If you are a low margin, high volume business and you've lost your volume and people are, scrambling because they know there's not enough work, the wrong behaviors are getting rewarded right now. And that is creating a lack of psychological safety. The other thing I've noticed is we've had to make some tough decisions, and I'm an HR person. And sometimes those decisions are so-and-so is struggling with yada, yada, and we don't have time to deal with that. We need people that are actually going to be acting. And I know so many people, it's not just kids at home, it's sick parents, locally, overseas, potentially a partner that is an essential worker, so a lack of support at home. So it's like a compounding of a lot of issues in the personal and home space as well. And so reaching out to ask for help in a culture or in a business that is just not doing very well is just a huge risk, because you're kind of putting a target on your back, almost saying that I'm actually struggling right now, and as a result, I can't produce what I was producing before, or I can't produce more than what I'm producing before. And that's always a hard conversation to have. We talk about psychological safety in the context of organizational culture, but we're seeing the culture shift. Like good, positive, vibrant cultures are turning into cultures of fear and survival. And so that shift is happening in real time, and there's a lot falling through cracks. So those are sort of some of my high-level thoughts. Like, I know there's also a lot of loss. People have family just down south. There's a different kind of loss that they're experiencing, which is a lack of connection too. So it's, again, reiterating what everybody's talked about, it is important. But I also think that right now, I've seen this play out a few times in my own experiences. So-and-so does not have the bandwidth because they've got XYZ going at home. And so, yeah, they're not bad people, but we don't want to deal with that issue. So it's not being dealt with in a malicious way. It's just the reality of the business and when you have to make a decision between keeping person A and B, well, if person B comes with a lot of baggage, guess what? No fault, person B, you're out. And I think that's unfortunate, because those are the people that need help the most. And in terms of the future of the workforce, they're going to have a hard time being vulnerable moving forward, because the lesson they're learning is honesty, vulnerability, and asking for support is not being supported. It is actually being punished. So just a couple of, cents from a newbie on the group.
I think those are really excellent points. And you're so right. And I'm sure everybody here would agree. And you're right. And we're all experiencing organizations that are struggling. And I know people who have spoken to me who are afraid to speak up because they know, or they think that the organization is in the background figuring out, when are we letting more people go and who will it be? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the answer is to that, right? I don't know. Is this maybe not the time where people are going to feel, well, I'm going to test that vulnerability out right now?
Yeah. And I mean, I say this with the least bit of judgment, because how do you make the right business decision and support everyone, right? It's just one of those situations where it is not always realistic either. So it's not coming from a malicious place, or leaders aren't just taking the easy way out. It's just they're having to make tough decisions, and this is part of that.
Absolutely. And there's more probably coming. And so, I agree with you, Bonnie. People don't want uncertainty, and yet they're looking for certainty from leaders who don't know either. And so everybody's struggling right now. So people want to know what's going to happen, but our politicians, the heads of our country, don't even know what's going to happen.
From the assistant's point of view, they do appreciate, though, hearing from leaders who say, I don't have all the answers. And if you have some ideas, I'm interested in hearing, an open door policy. And furthermore, the executive assistants of the world are very eager to support HR as well. Some of them are feeling underutilized and under leveraged. And so depending on the situation, it may be worth just asking the questions.
I agree. And I think what happens with some leaders is they go into the bunker, because the leaders are also struggling. Just because you're a leader doesn't mean that you are immune from any of this. Like, everybody's struggling, right? So it's 6:30. I always like to respect people's time, and we always run out of time. We have these great conversations and then time is over. I'm so glad everybody came. Everybody's welcome. Monday mornings at 9:30. The HR Strategy Council meets every Monday. We talk about these things every Monday. So, you know, if you're interested in these topics, you're welcome. Go to our page on LinkedIn. I put the links. And every 2 weeks, we have a big idea. They're usually in the morning at 9:30. We did a different time. And you're free to download any of our white papers. So they're also on our page. So take them, use them, share them, pull out what you need, reach out to anybody. You know, as we always say, our papers are a gift to our community. So we want everybody to cut, paste, insert, use them. That's the goal. Any last comments from the team? Paul, Sharon, Janice?
Maybe just, you know, one thing that we really hoped with this work was that we'll get people to start to do something, because sometimes people do nothing because it's intimidating, you know, it's challenging, it's difficult, it's unnerving, you're not experienced. And so at the risk of doing nothing, we really hope we can start to get people to do something, one little step at a time, to put this on the agenda to help us move this forward in a particular time that so desperately needs it as our reality today.
Yeah, very true. So thanks to the group and thanks to all of you for coming and listening. And we hope to see you again at some of our other events. We're working on diversity white papers right now. We're working on recruitment white papers. So if you're ever interested in those topics, you're all welcome. Thank you. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Deborah.
Great discussion.
Deborah.